Tonight, we are not venturing into the mind of a philosopher. Instead, we are stepping into a battlefield, but not one filled with choreographed moves, slow-motion horse charges, or spotless armor. No, tonight, we explore the reality of medieval combat. Mud, chaos, fear, sweat, and clashing steel dominate the scene. What actually took place looked nothing like the glamorized versions in films. Before you settle in, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe, but only if you truly appreciate my content. Also, share in the comments where you are watching from and what time it is for you. It's always exciting to discover the variety of places joining us around the globe. Now, dim the lights and maybe switch on a fan for a gentle background noise. Let's slowly immerse ourselves into night's experience. You wake up to a sound somewhere between a horn and a man yelling the word march, as if he is demanding a debt. There is no option to hit snooze. No soft bed comforts you, only the damp, cold ground and the heavy, aching feeling from sleeping in your armor remain. You attempt to stretch but instantly regret it. Your chainmail feels like it has fused with your skin, almost like a stubborn tattoo. Around you, about a dozen other soldiers are stirring, all sharing the same pained expressions and signs of trench foot. One is still out cold, his head resting on a helmet filled with rainwater, while another struggles to extract a slug from his boot using a dagger. You cannot decide whether you should focus on eating breakfast or offering apologies. Breakfast arrives, and it is what one might call a traditionally profound letdown. The meal consists of a piece of bread crust so tough it could possibly deflect arrows. It may have been baked during last Lent. You chew deliberately not because you enjoy it, but because your jaw still aches from the previous day's feast, which included meat of dubious quality and an item that might once have been a vegetable. You wash it down with lukewarm ale because drinking water in medieval times was a risky gamble with bacteria. There is no time to freshen up, although it does not really matter, as you have not glimpsed your own reflection for weeks. And honestly, that might be for the best. You splash some murky water on your face to pretend you are clean. Then you fasten armor that reeks as though it has been fermenting out of fear. Commands are shouted. Form up. Move out. The orders come from someone on horseback who clearly has not walked even a single mile himself. The army stirs as men grumble, armor clangs, and someone already limps after stepping barefoot on a sharp rock. The mud clings to your boots as if trying to steal your soul. You have yet to encounter the enemy, but you are already soaked, worn out, starving, and oddly questioning your entire existence. The worst part is knowing this is actually one of the easier mornings. When the command comes, march, you comply not out of desire, but because the alternative means being left behind and accused of desertion, which usually leads to losing something very important. So you keep moving forward, one squelching, miserable step at a time. The ground feels less like soil and more like damp hopelessness. Mud is expected, but not just any mud. This mud seems to grip your boots as if it wants to steal your soul, or at least your left foot. You pause to fix a strap and immediately lag behind, receiving hostile stares from the man behind you, whose expression silently warns, "If you slow me down again, I will devour you." Wearing armor on a trek turns out to be miserable. It cramps, it pinches, and it chafes in places you never imagined had skin. Your shoulders throb, your thighs burn, and even your inner thighs conspire against you with each clanging step. You feel like a walking iron sausage slowly roasted in your own sweat. The air carries the stench of farm animals, cheap onions, and raw fear. Someone ahead lets out a powerful fart that sounds like they lost a battle with last night's turnip stew. You attempt to breathe through your mouth, but quickly regret it too. Along the way, you pass a dead hedgehog, a broken cart, and possibly a severed toe. No one stops. Halting is for those who enjoy being yelled at, Yet the sergeant shouts relentlessly, his voice a constant, his entire character distilled to yelling. Morale is utterly absent. Some men sing ancient war chants to survive, others whisper prayers. One man at the back just screams into the wind. No one asks him to stop, and honestly, it's a relief. At one point you think maybe the enemy will surrender before you even arrive. Then you realize they are probably having the same thoughts, which means this will likely end with panic, everyone thrusting their weapons wildly, and you struggling to recall which end of the spear is meant to strike. After what feels like an eternity, a hill comes into view. Naturally, that is where the battle is set to unfold. Every medieval fight seems to happen atop some pointless hill. As you start climbing, someone stumbles and tumbles down. Nobody offers a hand. They are better off now, yet you keep moving forward. Eventually, you reach the spot where sleep will be impossible tonight. The battle camp is less of a command center and more a chaotic mess. There are tents, of course, but only for the nobles. The rest of you receive a patch of mud that is just slightly less cursed than the surrounding muck. You claim your place by collapsing heavily onto the ground and declaring it your bed. Your adjacent comrades do the same. Congratulations, you have now joined a makeshift trench community. Then the stench hits you. It is a disturbing blend of damp wool, unwashed bodies, fermented boots, and whatever is decomposing near the food stall. There is a constant low hum in the air, not from excitement, but flies, thousands of them. Some seem even familiar by now. You have accepted their presence. Then there is the latrine, which means a shallow pit hastily dug with regret. Privacy is non-existent. The smell is nothing short of biblical. You avoid eye contact during your visit, as everyone's dignity has long since disappeared. Afterward, you are handed a bowl of stew. It is gray. That is the only flavor you can detect. Gray. You ask what ingredients are inside. The cook holds your gaze for 5 uncomfortable seconds before turning away. You eat the food regardless because hunger has taken over, hoping that whatever flesh lies inside didn't belong to someone just a couple of hours ago. Some men are busy sharpening their weapons, while others are engrossed in dice games. A number of individuals pray loudly, not out of genuine faith, but to make sure everyone around knows they are praying, just in case divine protection favors the most dramatic. Then the sounds come. Harsh coughs, soft cries in the distance, a man singing off-key about bread, and somewhere nearby, someone attempting to play a lute as if it were a weapon. A knight shouts an order. He is spotless and carries the scent of lavender. You immediately dislike him. Night descends. You wrap yourself in a damp cloak, lying beside a man whose snores sound like he has swallowed an entire donkey. Sleep eludes you as your mind races through the many ways death could find you by morning or even tonight, if that goat kicks you again in the ribs. Just as you begin to drift off, a voice calls out from afar, "Gather at sunrise." Wonderful. Another glorious morning is waiting. Dawn arrives, bringing the cold certainty that you might die in a field soon, perhaps before midday. You have not even brushed your teeth, not that you possess a toothbrush or teeth worth saving. Trumpets blare, men groan. You crawl from your damp cocoon of lice-ridden wool to see your companions already faking motivation. You fall in line because that is what is expected. Standing in formation gives people a slight illusion of control over the approaching catastrophe. It is a false comfort, but one you can awkwardly slip into with numb feet and uncertain stomach sensations. Then he steps forward, the dignified leader, clad in gleaming armor, so spotless it almost emits light. He carries the kind of confidence only someone untouched by real violence could possess. He scans the ranks like a disappointed guardian who just discovered you allied with the losers in a tavern fight. Clearing his throat, everyone tenses. The moment has arrived. "Men, today we battle for glory," he announces. A pause stretches out. Near you, someone coughs up something troubling. "For our king, our lands, our honor," the crowd echoes quietly, mostly from discomfort rather than true patriotism. Look to your brothers, look to your weapons. You glance sideways. The soldier beside you trembles noticeably, helmet worn backwards. His blade is warped. The enemy fears us. Perhaps not. They likely have their own commander yelling similar words in another language. If you die today, oh good, the cheerful part, you die as heroes. You fight the urge to raise your hand and ask, could I maybe die later, possibly as a baker? Then comes the part about God. God is on our side, which is meant to soothe, but you suspect God has been too busy striking down everyone evenly this season. The speech ends with a sword raised skyward and a resounding cry of forward. No one moves. A few blink. One sneezes. The shouting persists until, at last, someone shuffles forward, and the others reluctantly follow, not because they believe in the cause, but mainly because standing still might get you picked by the commander for some unpleasant volunteer duty. You've heard about what happened to the last volunteer, so the pep talk ends here. Now you are mentally set to panic with intention. It is time to fall into formation, a term that usually brings to mind order, discipline, and tactical planning. Instead, you face a chaotic bunch of people vaguely facing the same way. Half are still struggling to put on their helmets. Some clutch weapons they grabbed only minutes ago. One man holds a pitchfork, and you are fairly certain he stumbled in by mistake. Your sergeant, who was likely a pig farmer a few years back, starts shouting numbers that nobody understands, yet everyone nods as though they know what he means. Front line shield wall, he yells. Second line pikes, forward. You comply, even though the person in front of you holds his shield upside down, using it to scratch his back. To your left stands a man with a spear twice his size, who keeps accidentally jabbing those nearby. On your right, a man hums what sounds like a battle hymn, but it might just be the tune of Greensleeves with altered lyrics. Right behind you, someone gasps and wheezes like they have been rehearsing dramatic death sounds well in advance. You suspect he is not seriously hurt, just theatrically prepared. Nearby, the cavalry waits on one side, horses snorting softly, ready to charge. Rain pounds the earth intensely. Knights stand tall and immaculate, clad in full-plate armor worth more than an entire village. They appear regal. You, on the other hand, wear borrowed boots and chainmail that reeks as if someone perished in it, probably because someone did. Suddenly, a command echoes to advance and tighten the line. This proves difficult when nearly every other person steps on another's foot, and the mud threatens to engulf the smaller soldiers completely. Your feet slip, an elbow jabs you, and your shield ends up facing the wrong way. You lack the strength to fix it. Then the drum starts to beat, slow and foreboding, signaling the beginning of battle. Men begin whispering prayers. One quietly breaks down in tears. You pretend not to notice, since you are busy confronting your own fears about death. You inhale deeply, raise your weapon, and struggle to remain conscious. This is it. You are as prepared as possible for a group of frightened peasants arranged in a haphazard line. Just when the formation starts to look somewhat organized, without anyone wandering off, the sky betrays your hope. First, there is a sound, a faint distant rush, that swells into a shared murmur of impending disaster. Then voices shout, "Shields up!" You rush to comply, although someone nearby is still trying to figure out which side of the shield is supposed to face upward. Suddenly the sky grows darker. Not. The sky is filled with clouds, but they are accompanied by hundreds of tiny death sticks fired from the enemy's side with frightening eagerness. And then they descend. The arrows pour down with the relentless force of a furious god enduring an extremely bad day. The man 2 rows ahead falls immediately, an arrow protruding from his shoulder like a neglected quill. Someone shouts. Another utters curses in Latin. Or perhaps he was merely sneezing. It is difficult to discern amidst the chaos. Here is what films fail to capture. Arrows do not glide smoothly into their targets like dancers with precise movements. They thud, snap, lodge themselves, and sometimes bounce off armor before embedding in places never meant to be pierced, such as feet, thighs, and whatever can be called emotional resilience. You attempt to shrink behind your shield, which suddenly seems far too small and worryingly homemade. An arrow clangs against it with a metallic ring, and you immediately decide this shield is your closest companion. You mentally name it Gerald. You softly vow to Gerald that if you survive, you will never criticize its uneven shape again. To your left, someone is swearing at the archers. To your right, someone is being sworn at, mostly because he forgot to duck. Behind you, a man shouts that he has been hit, although you strongly suspect he is just trying to avoid what is about to come next. Then the second volley arrives. At this moment, any remaining sense of calm has vanished. Experienced soldiers crouch low and quietly chant mantras. Newcomers openly shed tears. One man simply lies down and feigns death. Honestly, it is not the worst tactic. Gradually, the sky brightens. You have survived. Gerald performed well. However, now the real nightmare starts. Hand-to-hand combat demands that you become excessively sweaty, exceedingly loud, and likely wounded by a stab. There is no countdown, no booming drumbeat, no heroic charge like in the ballads. One moment you are shaking within your unsteady formation, and the next, chaos erupts completely. It begins with a push. Your group advances, driven not by valor, but by the unavoidable force of those who know hesitation will lead to being crushed. Someone ahead shouts an inspiring phrase, immediately stumbles, and is trampled. You do not pause to assist, not out of cruelty, but because you are almost certain you would suffer the same fate. Then physical contact occurs without question. Bodies collide as if sacks of potatoes crash into sacks of potatoes equipped with deadly weapons. Forget elegant sword duels, this is no graceful display. It is a brutal grinder of flesh. You swing your weapon, which could be a sword, an axe, or merely an enhanced farm tool. There is no precise aim, no time for finesse. You wildly strike. You hear metal clashing on metal, wood breaking, men groaning, and someone close by repeatedly yelling as if chanting for war. The battle is intense and personal. You become acutely conscious of the odors surrounding you, enemy sweat, terror, and the smell of onions. There is no escape. There is no such thing as personal space here. Only chaos exists. At one moment you thrust downward, hoping you didn't harm your own foot. Your visor fogs up, visibility disappears, breathing becomes difficult. Someone's shoulder crashes into your ribs, and you both stagger aside, gasping for air. Blood stains your gauntlet. Probably not yours. Maybe it is. It does not matter. A man swings at your head. Instinctively, you duck. His strike catches someone else instead. You share a brief look, half an apology, and half a shrug. There is no time for blame. Only the will to survive remains. You try to recall your training, but it largely boils down to strike hard and stay alive. So, you keep attacking, occasionally landing a blow but more often missing. Every so often someone collapses. Sometimes they scream. Other times silence falls immediately. You try to avoid looking. This is not a cinematic battle. This is a bar brawl in the world's worst tavern, filled with 500 furious men and no one to stop the fight. And this is just the beginning. If you imagined medieval combat to sound like the graceful clashing of swords accompanied by noble trumpets, you are profoundly mistaken. Instead, it resembles the chaos of a livestock market crashing into a blacksmith's workshop during an earthquake. The first thing you notice is the screaming. It never stops. It is not only from the injured, though they are many, but from the living as well. Men shout to boost their courage. They yell because they have been wounded. They yell because someone stepped on their foot, or because confusion reigns about which side they belong to. Now everyone is wildly swinging at anything that moves, including a bush. There are the sharp shrieks of inexperienced young men who probably should have stayed back at the bakery, deep growls from burly figures wielding axes, and the high-pitched, almost hesitant whimpers of a man realizing he has the wrong team colors on. Somewhere behind the chaos, someone shouts, "Hold the line!" But it sounds as futile as a man commanding the tide to halt. No one pays attention. You cannot even hear him over the chaos. You are too occupied dodging flying weapons and wondering if your left arm always made that strange clicking sound. Then, the clash of weapons begins. Swords clang against shields, maces land with a dull, dreadful thud on soft targets, usually a face. Arrows whistle past your ears, carrying the unmistakable sound of regret. At times, a spear pierces armor, and the blood-curdling scream that follows makes your spine question its dedication to standing upright. However, the most dreadful sounds are not the screams or even the dying cries. It is the wet noises, yes, wet, the squelch of stepping into what was once a person, the slurp of blood mixed with mud under your boots, the squish when someone falls hard and does not rise again. These sounds linger in your memory. They settle permanently in your nightmares. Amid this, you also hear the clanking of armor, men crying out for their mothers, the haunting scream of a horse, and somewhere in the distance, an unbelievable noise emerges. Attempting to sing a hymn off-key and horribly out of tune, your ears start to ring, not from injury, but from sheer sensory overload. Your mind shudders, leaving you to act purely on reflex as your brain takes an unannounced break. Yet the yelling never ceases. If you expected a cinematic slow-motion moment where you deliver a poignant final speech before dramatically collapsing, I must disappoint you. That is not how it unfolds. Most warriors in medieval battles perished unnoticed and unheard, often from behind. Often, the one who ended your life might not have even known your name. Occasionally, it was even someone on your own side. The battlefield is not a courteous theater. It is a sweaty, chaotic mosh pit where any tiny mistake could turn deadly. One instant you are swinging your axe with purpose. The next moment, a sudden jabbing force pierces your back, your legs give way, and you fall forward awkwardly into the mud like a collapsing haystack. No one takes notice. There simply isn't time. There are no last words, no comforting hands to hold. Just you, the earth beneath you, and a growing suspicion that all this might have been prevented if you had chosen a monk's life instead. Then there are those crushed under horses, not stabbed or slashed, but trampled into the soil by a panicked warrior named Buttercup. And we must not overlook the damage caused by friendly fire, not explosive blasts, but the kind where an untrained militia member wildly swings a flail, hoping to strike an enemy, but accidentally. In battle, you might lose your ear or even your head. No matter the outcome, you become known as the one who stood just a little too close to Jeff. Some combatants fall and are abandoned. Whether unconscious, wounded, or simply devoted to feigning death, they remain motionless as boots trample past. Some survive, others perish. Survival depends largely on fortune, the mud beneath, and whether a plunderer confuses them for actual loot. Sometimes death strikes in a cruelly random way, a slip on blood-soaked grass, a twisted ankle in a pit made for waste, or being crushed beneath a frantic heap of men all fleeing, but moving in the same direction. In essence, dying in the medieval era was far from dignified. It was clumsy, undignified, and almost always unexpected. This is why a survivor is celebrated not for courage, but for pure, unearned luck. Films depict knights and horses as grand and majestic figures, galloping into battle like unstoppable forces of nature. In truth, horses used in medieval warfare were more like unpredictable wrecking balls plagued by nerves than glorious beasts. When cavalry charges occur, you do not hear fanfares, but a deep rumble, the kind that shakes your chest and signals an urgent need to empty your bowels. Looking up, you witness massive war horses approaching at speeds you never imagined, from animals fed solely on grass. From a distance, the knights appear impressive, clad in gleaming armor with banners fluttering behind them. Yet beneath the surface, chaos and danger reign supreme, and extravagant helmets that clearly say, "I paid extra for this." But when you get close, all you hear is chaos. from the horses, from the riders, from everyone. Because here is the truth, horses do not care about neat lines. They do not acknowledge personal boundaries. They cannot tell whether someone is an enemy or just a person trying to survive. If you stand in their path, you will be crushed into what future archaeologists might call a tragic smear. One man is completely trampled, disappearing beneath hooves, never to be found again. Another attempts to grab a knight's leg but misses, and is kicked so forcefully in the chest that he might as well be declared a belle. Several knights fall off, more than you would expect actually. Slippery mud combined with heavy armor turns out to be a dangerous mix. The noise when they hit the ground is like a mix between collapsing shelves and a church bell getting punched. They then lie there like stunned beetles, flailing and cursing as they struggle to get up before someone pokes them with something sharp. And do not think the horses are unaffected by the confusion. One rears up dramatically, gets spooked by a flag, and dashes off in the wrong direction, dragging its rider toward the latrines. Another just refuses to budge, leading to a shouting match between horse and knight that everyone awkwardly avoids. For foot soldiers, there is one simple rule: never be beneath a horse. This is a rule that nobody forgets, often learned the hard way. By the end, the horses are stained with blood, the men are bruised and battered. Scattered fragments of formations that once stood are now nothing more than sorrowful memories. Tomorrow, the cavalry will likely repeat the same brutal charge. During the heat of battle, after the flying arrows, piercing screams, and accidentally receiving an elbow from at least 3 comrades nearby, you find yourself falling. It could be due to a shove, tripping over a severed limb, or slipping on a ghastly mixture of blood, bile, and someone's freshly spilled breakfast. The cause matters little because you are down. In medieval warfare, falling is no simple act, but rather a critical moment demanding an urgent choice. You have only around 3 seconds to decide: rise and risk immediate death, or remain on the ground and still face grave danger. Choosing to stand again requires courage and honor, yet harbors tremendous risk. Rising makes you a conspicuous, upright target amid the chaotic battlefield, increasing the chance of being struck down swiftly. Worse, you might be crushed beneath the hooves of your own horsemen, who see little distinction between you and the dirt. Conversely, staying prone offers no guarantee of safety. Bodies collapse over you, horses trample nearby, and scavengers occasionally prod the fallen, searching to determine if they are alive or merely pretending. Should anyone realize you are feigning death, they may react harshly, ending the charade for good. Nevertheless, many opt for the stillness of the silent grave, lying quiet, breathing shallowly, hoping no one will crush their spine as they endure the pandemonium of clashing steel all around them. Men shouting, the unmistakable wet sound of something ending badly close by. A man collapses beside you. He does not move. You try to avoid looking, and sometimes that works. Survival depends on being the battlefield's most stubborn survivor. Eventually, the fighting moves away. The noise quiets, and you are still alive. Victory, in a way. The real challenge is getting back up, because now you are covered in dirt, blood that you cannot tell if it is yours, and the quiet shame of having stayed alive by acting like a dead body. When you manage to stand, provided you are not part of a new pile of bodies, you glance around, dizzy, bent over, and smelling like a cursed boot. Nobody cheers, no one notices. You are just another person who refused to fall, which by medieval standards means you are among the fortunate few. The battle ends. You cannot really tell how it finished. There was no dramatic flag raised, no cruel commander shouting retreat as trumpets sounded. One moment chaos ruled, the next fewer screams, less clashing steel, more moans. That signals the end. The sounds shift from fierce to weary. You look around, blinking through blood, hopefully not your own, and sweat. The battlefield is scattered with bodies, weapons, and an occasional boot, strangely separated from its owner, now resting on a rock as if politely waiting. It is quiet, disturbingly so. Someone mutters, "We won," saying it with the excitement of a man who just learned he will survive, but only in a tent full of sickness. Another guy shouts, "Victory," you say, clutching your own arm that is no longer fully connected. You acknowledge, nodding, because technically, yes, you are upright, breathing, and mostly intact. That counts as victory. However, in medieval combat, triumph rarely involves celebration. It simply means not being dead yet. It means hauling your battered, sore body back through the battlefield to the camp, passing fallen comrades and former foes alike, all wearing the exact same weary expression. In reality, this is how it ends. There is no jubilation, no grand feast. At best, you receive half a jug of war ale and some bread that feels more like a weapon than nourishment. A priest quietly recites prayers over the dead, while a few men rummage through bodies searching for anything of value. One soldier finds a decent pair of boots and calls the day a victory. Meanwhile, your commander, somehow still spotless, delivers a speech about courage and honor. You cannot focus on the words. Your ears are ringing, and your mind is occupied with more pressing matters like not collapsing. You think about the men who did not survive. Then your thoughts turn to your foot, which might be broken. Finally, you consider the stew and instantly regret it. Still, you are alive, filthy, traumatized, possibly concussed, yet alive. In medieval terms, that is what people call an overwhelming success. You slump down on a rock, exhale deeply, and whisper the same phrase every survivor of every medieval battle has uttered quietly to themselves: never again. Then the call comes to return for another skirmish the following week. Swords are now sheathed, and the groaning becomes the main soundtrack of the battlefield. It is time for the less glorious part of fighting, the cleanup. You might think this means only burying the dead and caring for the injured. While that is true to some extent, it also involves a mixture of emergency care, scavenging, and a gruesome medieval art project using human body parts. First, the medics arrive. By medics, we mean men armed with knives, poor eyesight, and no formal education in medicine. Their favorite phrases include "that will need to come off" and "bite down on this stick." An experienced surgeon might clean your wound with wine. A less skilled one might drink the wine instead. You sit down, nursing a deep cut from a sword on your thigh, hoping it is not life-threatening. The barber surgeon, the same person who usually trims beards, glances at your injury and says, "We will see." Then he pulls out a needle sterilized by waving it near a candle flame. You try not to scream, but fail miserably. At the same time, bodies are pulled into uneven piles. Some are covered while most lie exposed. You recognize a few faces, but do not stop to dwell. The stench grows almost otherworldly. Flies swarm in huge numbers, eager to feast in an all-you-can-eat banquet. One lands on your open wound. You shoo it away and realize that might be the cleanest thing you experience today. Other soldiers salvage gear, which is a gentle way of saying they are looting the battlefield. They dig through the remains, searching for anything valuable. Bodies transformed into swords, helmets, shoes, anything not firmly fixed or alive, twitching. No judgment passes. You follow the same path. New boots are necessary, and Gregor will not be needing his anymore. Sorry, Gregor. Some men dig shallow graves, others ignite small fires. One man simply sits silently with a blank expression and a spear still lodged in his arm. Attempts to assist him are refused. "It is mine now," he murmurs. Wounds are bandaged, yet some reopen within 5 minutes. Infection seems likely. Amputation may be inevitable. Survival depends on luck and whether flies pay attention. By the time night falls, the battlefield quiets down. The survivors stumble back to camp soaked in mud, blood, and a growing unease that the hardest part is yet to come. And, in a sense, they are correct. You have endured. Technically, you have wandered off the field with all your limbs intact and just enough clarity to recognize your boots, which might well have belonged to another this morning. Now it is time to rest. By rest, it means collapsing somewhere somewhat dry and trying hard not to break down. 2. Back at camp, the stench worsens. Somehow the mixture of sweat, blood, spoiled stew, and cooked horse permeates the air like a curse no one dares to name. You find your place, a patch of dirt less marshy than the rest, and fall down with the awkwardness of a spilled sack of onions. Around you, wounded men moan, some scream, one sings poorly, another prays to at least 3 different deities. To be cautious, the soldiers have invoked the gods. Close by, a warrior is wiping his sword with his shirt, which he still wears. The cook is serving what might resemble food. You approach and receive a bowl containing something that could not legally be called soup, but still counts on an emotional level. Its texture is like pure regret, and its color is best left undescribed. You eat it with no remaining sense of shame. That was lost somewhere between the 5th volley of arrows and witnessing a man being struck to death by a confused warhorse. You attempt to sleep but find it impossible. Your body aches too much, and the person beside you snores with the force of a colossal organ tumbling down a slope. You shift your position more than a dozen times, ending up damp and uncomfortable. You gaze up at the stars and question what past misdeed could have led you to this fate. Occasionally someone stumbles in from the darkness, dragging a sword, muttering something about a next time. There won't be a next time, but then again, there always is. Your commander strolls through the camp, feigning concern. His armor remains spotless, and he is unscathed. You grow to despise him even more. Nevertheless, you survive. Your body is covered in bruises, and your mind feels as if it has been simmered in some strange concoction. But you made it through. This is what counts as rest in medieval warfare. The following day brings more cleanup, or worse, marching once again. Enduring a medieval battle does not grant peace. What it does offer is a place by the fire where you belong. A lukewarm mug filled with something vaguely alcoholic marks the beginning of retelling. You rewrite the past before the bruises even have a chance to fade completely. This is the usual ending, never with grand rituals or songs praising your bravery. Instead, it concludes with a group of grimy, broken men sitting on damp logs, attempting to outdo each other with tales that become more dubious with every passing moment. You hear one man swear he single-handedly defeated 6 knights using nothing but a frying pan. Another boasts that he caught an arrow mid-flight and hurled it back. Someone else insists he faced a war elephant in France, where elephants do not exist. You nod along, sip your drink, and stretch the truth yourself. In your account, you did not stumble over a corpse and scream. You cleverly adjusted your position. The moment where you tried to crawl into a bush to evade cavalry becomes a stealth tactic. You omit the part where you pleaded with a squire for comfort during the barrage of arrows because everyone here is doing the same, turning their pain into legend. This is not about pride, but about survival. If you can laugh at it, maybe the wounds are not permanent. If you tell the story skillfully, perhaps it will drown out the true memories, the scent of burning flesh, the terrified gaze of a dying man, the sound of metal striking bone. By this time, someone is roasting a dubious piece of meat, and nobody asks any questions. Laughter emerges, dry and tinged with desperation. A man fumbles with a lute, trying to bring some melody to the night. The instrument is missing 2 strings. The melody is slightly off, but nobody seems to mind. A woman who acts as a camp follower repairs a sleeve and softly hums, as if the world outside the warmth of the fire does not exist. You gaze into the flickering flames and reflect on how you barely survived, almost by chance, almost miraculously. Soon enough, you will be back on the road, heading to another battle, another fierce confrontation. Yet, at this moment, there is comfort, there is food, and there is the bond between men who understand exactly how much of your story is exaggerated, because theirs is too. And for this one night, that is enough. Long before the Great Wall became a continuous structure cutting across northern China, the region resembled a chaotic patchwork of kingdoms, each driven by its own goals and fears. This era is known as the Warring States period, a time filled with constant warfare when 7 mighty states fought mercilessly for supremacy over the heartland of China. With these kingdoms always clashing, collaboration was rare. Instead, they constructed individual walls, temporary defenses made from compacted earth, stones, and wood. These early barriers were not part of a grand coordinated effort. They were acts of desperation, like drawing a line in the sand challenging your enemy to cross it. These structures were less about stopping enemies and more about displaying authority and possession. They said, "This is mine. Dare to take it." However, their fears extended beyond rival states. To the north, past the fertile fields and river valleys, nomadic tribes wandered freely across the land. The Xiang were among the newcomers, led by a skilled chief. These horsemen, moving like shadows over the steppes, launched swift raids and disappeared before any counterattack could be organized. These assaults were far more than mere nuisances. They posed a threat to survival. They stole livestock, razed villages, and disrupted vital trade routes. Fragmented states found themselves forced to create barriers to keep the wilderness at bay. The earliest of these regional defenses extended for many miles, yet they remained fragile, hastily assembled from rammed earth or layers of brush and mud. Some were strengthened with wooden stakes or rough stone blocks, though few were designed to endure. Although these barriers lacked durability, they compensated with sheer manpower. Tens of thousands of peasants, conscripts, and prisoners were compelled into backbreaking labor with little rest or choice. These isolated walls often suffered neglect, falling apart as time passed and weather took its toll. Nevertheless, they marked the birth of an idea that China's northern border could be controlled, not through dialogue or diplomacy, but through brute force and construction. No single ruler conceived the Great Wall as it stands now. The vision of unification, of a continuous structure stretching across China's heartland, came later, with a ruler who desired not only dominance, but immortality carved in stone. Thus, amid dust and struggle, the foundation was set, not for just a wall, but for a legend. In the year 221 before the Common Era, after long periods of disorder, one man emerged. He accomplished what no one before him had managed to do. He united all of China. His name was Qin Shi Huang, the very first emperor of the Qin dynasty. He aimed not only to govern, but to completely transform the landscape itself. While others perceived a divided land torn apart by struggles, he envisioned the birth of a vast empire. To safeguard this vision, something monumental was necessary. Among his earliest proclamations as emperor was the order to connect and extend the regional walls that had been erected during the era of warring states. These separate barriers, some already deteriorating and others barely better than shallow ditches, were to be fused into one immense defensive structure to hold back the nomadic Xiongnu and other northern tribes. However, this was far beyond mere maintenance. It was an engineering feat on an imperial scale. Qin's ambition extended beyond military fortification. It represented authority, unity, and dominion. This unbroken wall was more than just a boundary of civilization. It was a symbol of his supreme power. To accomplish this, he forced hundreds of thousands of people, including soldiers, laborers, prisoners, and intellectuals who had disobeyed the regime, into service. Many succumbed to exhaustion and death, laboring in isolated mountain passes or under the blazing desert sun. The wall gained a grim nickname among the populace as the longest cemetery on earth. Yet the vastness of this endeavor was unlike anything the world had encountered before. The construction materials were harsh and elementary, earth tightly packed in layers within wooden frames. Workers compressed it by stomping or beating until solidified. Using logs where stone was accessible, labor relied purely on physical power. Tools were rudimentary. The landscape was unforgiving. Yet Qin Shang was determined. He did not merely construct a wall, he also developed roads, established standardized weights and measures, and even unified the written language. In his vision, everything, the roads, the regulations, the walls, was part of a single mission to impose order on chaos and create an enduring empire. The original Qin wall probably did not resemble the famous stone structures we imagine today, but it formed the essential base. It marked the start of a frontier that would rise, collapse, and rise again across many dynasties. Afterwards, control passed to the Han. Following Qin Shi Huang's death and the rapid fall of the Qin dynasty, many of his wide-ranging reforms were reversed. However, the wall itself was preserved. The Han dynasty, which lasted from 206 before the Common Era to 220 Common Era, which followed the Qin, understood the same timeless fact. The northern border of China was never truly safe. Consequently, instead of abandoning the project, the Han rulers intensified their efforts, expanding, reinforcing, and redefining the Great Wall. Particularly under Emperor Wu of Han, the wall evolved beyond a mere defensive structure. It became central to imperial policy. The Han launched extensive military campaigns to drive back the Xiongnu, the nomadic horsemen who had plagued the northern regions for countless generations. Through these efforts, they extended the wall further than it had ever reached before. Regions that would later become vital routes for commerce and travel over many centuries. The Han dynasty did more than simply restore the walls built by the Qin. They modified and enhanced them. Rather than relying only on compacted earth, they used bricks, stones, and advanced fortification techniques wherever the landscape permitted. Watchtowers were installed at regular intervals, enabling soldiers to detect enemy raiding parties from a distance and ignite signal fires, an early alert mechanism that allowed news of an assault to spread across hundreds of miles within a few hours. Beyond a military barrier, the Han Wall evolved into a logistical network. Garrison stations, signal towers, and supply depots transformed the wall into a practical military route. Troops could advance swiftly, provisions were distributed smoothly, and messages traveled rapidly either by beacon flames or runners. The Great Wall had grown into more than a mere boundary. It became a dynamic defense system. Life along the Han Wall was tough, but not overlooked. The empire assigned thousands of soldiers and settlers to isolated forts, forming a frontier society where families, traders, and outposts eagerly sought the protection of the empire. Gradually, these remote posts developed into small settlements, and near these outposts, different cultures met. Han Chinese and nomadic tribes exchanged goods, socialized, and sometimes conflicted in these dusty crossroads. By the conclusion of the Han period, the wall had changed into something far greater than a defensive line. It was a powerful emblem of imperial authority. Presence extended into the expansive northern territories, yet even the formidable Han dynasty was unable to maintain control indefinitely. Following this period came turmoil, the downfall of the empire, and ultimately the emergence of a new ruling family who introduced an innovative approach to wall construction. When the Han dynasty collapsed in the year 220 of the Common Era, China fragmented once more into political chaos and regional warlords. What had once been a centralized and powerful empire divided into competing kingdoms during the era known as the Three Kingdoms, leading to prolonged instability. As the imperial authority waned, the importance placed on the Great Wall diminished. Large sections of the walls built by the Han and Qin dynasties fell into ruin. Neglect, natural weathering, and repeated looting gradually wore down these defense structures. Guard stations were abandoned and observation towers fell apart. In many places, the wall became less of a protective barrier and more a forgotten monument, partially engulfed by shifting sands and overgrown vegetation. Without a unified government capable of managing its upkeep, the sheer size of the Great Wall made it impossible to maintain over time. Despite this decline, the dangers posed by northern nomadic groups did not vanish. Tribes such as the Canby, Ruran, and later the Gurks expanded their influence over the steppes. Several of these communities ultimately established their own kingdoms within Chinese borders, integrating cultures and redrawing territorial lines. During these turbulent centuries, the wall served less as a firm border and more as a symbol of an outdated defense strategy no longer aligned with the political landscape. Nevertheless, remnants of the wall still played a role for local rulers, with some warlords and regional leaders using fragments of the structure for their own security needs. Successive dynasties often incorporated remnants of ancient defenses to serve as foundations for their new fortifications. Others dismantled the old walls to extract building materials. Bricks and stones found new life as components for houses, temples, or local walls constructed throughout the region. This process was a gradual consumption of the remnants of a fallen empire's legacy. Meanwhile, in the collective consciousness, the wall gradually disappeared from immediate relevance. It ceased to be seen as a nationwide enterprise, but transformed into a subject of legends and historical texts. Chinese poets depicted remote battlefields and border strongholds, describing the northern frontier as a harsh, unforgiving place where men faced death, mostly forgotten. Yet, even amid this decline, the image of the wall retained its significance. It endured as a powerful emblem of what China had once represented and the potential it still held. It symbolized a vision of unity, resilience, and clarity amid disorder. This hopeful vision would reawaken with the rise of a new dynasty, born from warfare and driven by determination, the Ming. However, several more centuries would elapse before this revival. When the Ming dynasty assumed control in 1368, China had experienced a long history filled with invasions, downfall, and foreign domination. The wound left by the Yuan dynasty, governed by the Mongols, was still fresh in memory. The Mongol forces had swept across the north and ruled China for nearly 100 years. The overthrow of the Mongols by the Ming was more than just a change of power. It represented a profound cultural transformation. One pressing goal emerged from this victory: never again. The Ming emperors recognized the urgent necessity to prevent a repeat of past humiliations. The northern barrier was designed not as a mere symbol, but as a thoroughly practical defense. Unlike the earthen walls built by the Qin or the scattered military posts of the Han, the Ming Wall would be an entirely different creation. Constructed from stone, brick, and incorporating firepower, the building process began seriously in the late 15th century and accelerated throughout the 16th century, especially under leaders such as General Qi Zhuang. He viewed the wall not only as protection against nomadic Mongol incursions, but also as a demonstration of Ming authority. This dynasty aimed for lasting strength, and their construction reflected that. They used quarried stone and bricks, fired at high temperatures. The fortifications were strengthened, drainage systems were installed to prevent damage, watchtowers appeared at consistent distances, and beacon towers were set up to send smoke signals during the day and fire signals by night. This is the image of the Great Wall, most familiar to people today. Massive and winding, it stretched over mountain ranges, stretched across deserts, and clung to cliffs like a sturdy ribbon of armor. Some sections were as wide as a contemporary highway, while others soared as tall as a building with 3 floors, all built to endure through the ages. However, the wall was far more than a defensive structure. Along its route, the Ming dynasty established garrison settlements, supply stations, and housing for troops, giving rise to a secondary society of soldiers, farmers, and officials who lived and worked close by. This barrier was not simply a separation between China and the so-called barbarians beyond. It stood as a vital lifeline for the communities and military forces that depended on it each day. The soldiers who guarded the Great Wall and the empire that relied on it faced immense challenges. Although the Ming-era wall was formidable, it was not invincible. The nomadic tribes adapted over time, discovering vulnerabilities along the fortifications. Corruption among the guards weakened defenses. When the Manchus eventually arrived, they did not storm the wall violently. Instead, the gates were opened from within. Yet before this collapse, the Ming achieved something extraordinary. They transformed a legend into solid stone, making the Great Wall genuinely magnificent. Beneath its impressive battlements and parapets, the wall was a place marked by endurance, monotony, and the struggle to survive. For the countless soldiers stationed along its vast stretch during the Ming Dynasty, existence was far from glamorous. Life was brutal, cold, and often overlooked by the distant empire they vowed to defend. Troops were housed in fortified barracks and garrison towns sprinkled along the wall's backbone. These men were not elite warriors in shining armor. Rather, they were conscripted farmers, criminals, and peasants, individuals who exchanged their liberty or uncertain futures for a simple meal, a pair of boots, and a rough bed behind stone walls. Some joined voluntarily in pursuit of wages or honor. Others suffered exile to the frontier as punishment, where icy winters and relentless boredom pressed down like an unyielding frost. Each day followed a rigid routine filled with patrols, drills, wall maintenance, and hauling essential supplies. The wall demanded constant care, stones shifted, mortar cracked, and watchtowers required repair. The soldiers diligently fixed damaged sections with frozen hands, enduring fierce sandstorms in the west and severe snowstorms in the north. Despite harsh conditions, there was no break from their relentless duties. Life along the Great Wall was marked by endless vigilance, constant shifts, and the ever-present danger of a Mongol raid. Food was basic and often in short supply. They ate millet, beans, and salted meat. Vegetables grew in tiny patches where the soil permitted. If a raiding group attacked a supply caravan, it was not merely a drawback, it could result in starvation. Illness was widespread. Spirits were frequently low. Despite the severe consequence of execution, desertion was not rare. However, life was not entirely grim. Families often traveled with soldiers, forming small, close-knit communities beside the wall. Children entered the world in the shadow of these ancient stones. Merchants journeyed between military posts, exchanging wine, fabric, and rumors. Some locations experienced cultural exchanges as nomadic tribes, and Han settlers mingled through trade, marriage, or an uneasy truce. There were also the beacon sentinels placed in remote towers, far from any main garrison. Their responsibility was to monitor the horizon. A plume of smoke during daylight hours or a fire at night served as the alert. The signal was swift, straightforward, and ominous. These individuals lived either alone or in pairs, surrounded only by silence and endless sky. To exist on the Great Wall was to live between realms, between empire and wildlands, between legend and reality. These hidden lives were what maintained the wall. Not emperors or generals, but simple people with rough hands and frozen feet. Yet despite all their dedication, the wall's defense would not last indefinitely. For many centuries, the Great Wall stood as the supreme emblem of Chinese power. Enduring stone set against ever-changing sands, an empire confronting the unfamiliar. However, no matter how towering or massive the walls were, their true power relied entirely on those assigned to protect them. During the 17th century, that foundation faltered not due to external assault, but from internal decay. By the final years of the Ming Dynasty, Corruption had infiltrated the imperial administration like a spreading disease. Military wages were delayed or outright stolen. Essential supplies vanished before reaching the frontier posts. The once disciplined guards stationed along the barrier were now inadequately paid, poorly nourished, and exhausted. Spirit among the troops deteriorated sharply. Numerous outposts resorted to smuggling and local trading just to survive, frequently collaborating with the very nomadic forces they were meant to repel. It was within this vulnerable condition that the Ming encountered their most formidable adversaries, the Manchus. Emerging from the northeast, these newcomers differed from former nomadic groups. The Manchus possessed strong political organization and keen strategy, coupled with an unwavering ambition to govern as firmly as any Chinese dynasty had before. They did not require a furious assault to penetrate the defenses. A single, unguarded entry point would suffice. This vulnerability appeared in the year 1644, when General Wu Sanangui made a choice that would alter the course of history. Confronted by a widespread peasant uprising that had already captured Beijing, and facing inferior forces, Wu allowed the Manchu army through the crucial Shanhai Pass. He intended for them to help crush the rebellion, but instead they seized the capital and established the Qing dynasty. In a single moment, the Great Wall's fate was irrevocably changed. The whole meaning collapsed. It had not been defeated on the battlefield. Instead, it was circumvented, abandoned by those it was supposed to shield. The wall could not withstand changing allegiances, despair, or political expediency. During the Qing era, the Great Wall lost its strategic significance entirely. The empire pushed far into the northern lands, moving beyond the barrier that once marked civilization's boundary. It no longer served as a frontier, but became a relic, a symbol of a bygone age. Thus, the Great Wall, built over centuries, became useless due to a single moment of human failure. There was no forced entry or battle, simply a key falling into the wrong hands. Yet myths do not vanish so effortlessly. When the Manchu rulers established Qing dominance and expanded China's borders well past the wall, the formidable structure began its slow fade. It was not a sudden collapse, but a subtle disappearance. The military no longer relied on it. Commerce routes circumvented it. New fortifications emerged further into the borderlands. This immense monument of imperial determination quietly lost its relevance. Without a clear role, upkeep stopped. Soldiers left their posts, watchtowers decayed. Nearby communities repurposed its stones for building houses, wells, and pigsties. In some regions, large sections were dismantled piece by piece, not out of hostility, but out of necessity. Why mine new stone when the old wall stood unused? In desert areas, winds gradually buried fragments of it, while in the highlands, plant roots forced the stones apart. Separated by wide gaps, the stones experienced mortar being carried away by relentless rains. Centuries filled with storms, earthquakes, and the passage of time transformed what were once magnificent fortifications into uneven ridges and nearly invisible bumps on the horizon. Travelers and poets still spoke fondly of its splendor, yet few chose to explore it. Throughout the Qing dynasty, the wall stood as a relic from a past era, revered but seldom cared for or preserved. It was not until the 19th and early 20th centuries, during periods of foreign invasion, civil conflict, and rapid modernization in China, that the wall regained prominence in the nation's awareness. Foreign visitors, mostly European explorers and academics, arrived eager and curious. They idealized the wall, expressed admiration, and sometimes misunderstood its history, believing that a single emperor had constructed the entire structure, or that it could be seen from the moon. By the time the People's Republic of China was founded in 1949, the wall had evolved beyond mere stonework. It had become a powerful emblem of Chinese heritage, resilience, and cleverness. Mao Zedong famously declared, He who has not climbed the Great Wall is not a true man, turning the once neglected site into a patriotic milestone. Moving into the late 20th century, restoration efforts were launched, especially near Beijing. Visitors eagerly gathered at places like Badaling, where the wall was rebuilt to reflect its Ming Dynasty appearance. Meanwhile, other areas, wild, shattered, and genuine, stayed untouched, gradually yielding back to nature. Transitioning from forgotten rubble to an internationally recognized symbol, the Great Wall experienced a remarkable journey. The Great Wall of China tells a compelling story beyond its physical form. No longer just a defensive barrier, it has transformed into a gateway to history, symbolizing what humanity can achieve when motivated by fear, ambition, and dreams spanning many centuries. Recognized worldwide, this iconic structure is often misunderstood. People commonly think of it as a single, continuous wall, but in reality, it is a series of fortifications built by various dynasties over more than 2,000 years, weaving through mountains, deserts, and plains. It does not create an uninterrupted border, and contrary to popular myths, it is not visible from the moon. The reality is much more intriguing. The wall embodies more than just stone and mortar. It stands as a metaphor and a repository of memories. It reflects the long struggle of a civilization striving to define itself both against external threats and internal disorder. This story includes rulers fixated on establishing order, peasants subjected to grueling labor, and generals remembered not for battlefield triumphs, but for the lengths of wall they oversaw. This remarkable feat of ambition left a mark so vast it can be seen from the sky. Throughout history, the Great Wall has held different meanings for different people. Emperors saw it as a symbol of power, soldiers experienced it as a burden of duty, poets found in it a lonely space filled with echoes of separation, and today it stands as a cultural icon representing endurance, resilience, and national pride. Millions of visitors flock here, trekking along restored trails and snapping photos beside ancient watchtowers. They are attracted not only by the breathtaking scenery, but also by the legend, the notion that human hands crafted something so immense and resolute that it would endure beyond kingdoms, dynasties, and even time itself. In many respects, it has achieved that. However, vast sections of the wall lie in decay. More than 30% has already vanished through erosion, destruction, or dismantling. Now, protecting this heritage is a race against natural forces, urban growth, and neglect. The present challenge is no longer to construct the wall, but to safeguard what is left, to uphold a history that spans continents and centuries. Ultimately, the Great Wall was never merely a barrier to keep foes at bay. Instead, it symbolized the boundary between civilization and wilderness, empire and uncertainty, the familiar and the feared. In doing so, it transcended simple defense and transformed into a legend. Brick by brick, tale by tale, the wall continues to stand, not just in the landscapes of northern China, but also in the global imagination. The year was 1860, and America found itself at a crossroads of promise and turmoil. With Civil War looming and the California gold rush igniting fervor, one thing was painfully evident. The United States was expanding faster than its communication networks could handle. The eastern seaboard buzzed with telegraph lines and railroads, yet the western territories might as well have been an entirely separate world. Sending a letter from St. Joseph, Missouri to Sacramento, California could take 3 to 4 weeks on a good day. That estimate assumed stagecoaches were not delayed by snow, bandits, or the occasional collapse of a fragile bridge. In a nation obsessed with manifest destiny, waiting a whole month to find out if your gold shipment had arrived or if Lincoln had been nominated was intolerable. The government had experimented with alternatives, such as steamships traveling around Cape Horn or through the Panama Isthmus. But these routes were costly, risky, and painfully slow. The West required timely information rather than news that was obsolete once it reached its destination. What the country desperately needed was speed, ideally without having to endure a 6-month voyage around South America. Enter the Pony Express, a daring, reckless, and some might say wildly impractical solution. The idea was straightforward. A series of young, lightweight riders would race day and night on horseback across nearly 2,000 miles of rough terrain. Relay stations were set up every 10 to 15 miles where fresh horses could be exchanged within minutes, and no stopping was allowed. Rain, snow, or even enemy arrows could not prevent the mail from moving forward. Letters would travel from Missouri to California in less than 10 days. Although it sounded insane, constructing a transcontinental railroad also seemed impossible once, yet it succeeded. This effort was more than just mail delivery. It symbolized the belief that the American frontier could be tamed through determination, bravery, and countless saddles pounding the trail. The story revolved around making a vast and disorderly nation feel somewhat more unified. At the heart of this endeavor was an eclectic group of entrepreneurs, youthful riders, and tired station managers preparing to make history while riding horseback. However, despite its rapid rise, the Pony Express soon found itself competing against an unstoppable force, the speed of light itself. The masterminds behind the Pony Express were neither wild cowboys nor government officials. They were shrewd businessmen, determined, ambitious, and perhaps a bit desperate. William H. Russell, Alexander Major, and William B. Weddell were deeply involved in the overland freight industry. They managed supply routes to military outposts in the West, transporting everything from barrels of flour to cannons through Native American lands and desolate plains. With contracts drying up and the economy unstable, they chose to take a bold risk, just like any savvy capitalist trapped in a tough situation would. Their innovative idea was to create the fastest mail delivery service in the country's history, securing a lucrative government contract to sustain it. They named their enterprise the Central Overland California and Pikes Peak Express Company, a title that was quite a mouthful. The media and public quickly adopted a catchier and more exciting name, the Pony Express. This venture was far more than just a logistical challenge. It was a grueling race across some of the harshest terrain. The route spanned nearly 2,000 miles from St. Joseph, Missouri to Sacramento. California cut across the relentless heart of the American wilderness. Mountain passes in the Rockies could devour entire wagon trains, and deserts in Nevada were so harsh that horses might collapse within just a few hours. Despite these obstacles, Russell and his team believed they could succeed. They constructed more than 150 relay stations, hired close to 80 riders, and acquired 400 of the strongest, fastest ponies money could acquire. Their initial objective was symbolic, to deliver Lincoln's inaugural speech to California faster than ever before. The effort served both as a publicity stunt and a direct challenge to the telegraph and the stagecoach, two dominant forms of communication in the 19th century. The inaugural ride started on April 3, 1860, attracting a crowd in St. Joseph eager to see the first rider dash out carrying a mail pouch over his saddle. Cheers filled the air, and a legend was born. Behind the excitement, however, the company was losing money rapidly. Stations needed constant staffing, horses required feeding, riders deserved payment, and equipment was frequently replaced. Still, financial concerns were ignored, as everyone's attention focused on the trail. Could this daring venture truly succeed? What unfolded next was more than just speed. It was a spectacle of bravery, disorder, and spontaneous problem-solving. Riders battled through snowstorms, escaped attacks, and occasionally crossed rivers crusted with ice. They transported more than mail. They bore the hope of a united nation, and for a brief, glorious period, it worked. the Pony Express demanded only one crucial quality from its riders. They had to be young, really young, ideally orphans. This way, if they did not make it on the journey, there would be fewer complaints. Charming, isn't it? The typical rider was between 14 and 20 years old, weighing no more than 125 pounds. The lighter the boy, the faster the horse could run. Advertisements famously sought thin, lean lads under the age of 18. Orphans were preferred. It was part job posting, part challenge. And those who accepted it belonged to a unique kind, reckless, determined, and bred for speed. One of the most famous was William Buffalo Bill Cody, who later became a legendary figure of the Wild West. Although people debate about how much he actually participated in the Express, the image of a teenage Cody riding fiercely through dangerous lands, armed only with a revolver and a mail pouch, helped build the legend. Another notable rider was Pony Bob Haslam, who completed one of the longest and most perilous rides in the Express's history, 120 miles through Butte territory with arrows still lodged in his shoulder. These were not merely mail carriers, they were thrill-seekers. Riders raced through freezing rain and swirling sandstorms, often going day and night with barely any rest. They carried a moolah, a saddlebag made to be quickly transferred between horses, containing the precious cargo, about 20 letters, packed tightly and wrapped in oilskin to keep them safe from harsh weather. Every moment was crucial. Riders would swap horses about every 10 to 15 miles, stopping only just long enough to sling the moolah over the new mount. A fresh horse would be saddled and a quick gulp of water taken. Each rider covered a distance from 75 to 100 miles continuously, then collapsed at a home station to eat and recover before repeating the process all over again. Perils awaited at every corner, outlaws, wild creatures, crossing rivers, and assaults by hostile groups protecting their lands from trespassers posed constant threats. The Express did not transport weapons of war, yet each rider carried a revolver, a knife, and remarkable courage. Riding solo through the night, the only companions were the rhythmic sound of hooves and the whisper of the wind. In spite of these hazards, the Pony Express almost always succeeded in its mission. The mail was delivered nearly without fail. During those brief 18 months, these youthful adventurers became icons, living embodiments of American determination. Although the riders gained fame, it was the network of nearly 157 relay stations that made the Pony Express possible. Without them, there would have been no daring sprints, no record-setting journeys of just 10 days, and certainly no letters arriving in Sacramento intact. These stations were the forgotten heroes, scattered approximately every 10 to 15 miles across deserts, plains, and mountain passes, serving as small oases of civilization in vast wilderness. They came in two primary forms: relay stations and home stations. Relay stations were minimal, utilitarian stops where a rider exchanged a tired horse for a fresh one. This exchange was a true pit stop, often completed in less than 2 minutes. Imagine a young rider, barely old enough to vote, rushing in at full speed, tossing the mailbag onto a waiting saddle, and taking off once more in a swirl of dust. Home stations were set approximately every 75 to 100 miles and acted as crucial rest stops for the riders. At these spots, young men could eat, sleep, and try to regain their strength before continuing their journey. Often, these stations were run by station keepers and their families who lived in remote cabins or sod houses equipped mainly with a fireplace and a strong sense of responsibility. The entire mail delivery system relied on them. A missed horse, a shut gate, or a sleepy attendant could lead to hours of delay, which was simply not an option. Life at these stops was far from glamorous. Supplies were limited, and stations located in the harsh desert or vast plains had to defend against attacks, endure severe winters, and face dangerous wildlife like rattlesnakes and wolves. Station keepers commonly kept a rifle close by and remained vigilant even while resting. Despite these tough conditions, the system functioned effectively most of the time. Horses were strategically stationed and riders adhered to strict schedules. Each station acted like a pulse in the intricate network of the Pony Express. If one missed a beat, the entire system would suffer. Yet, when everything aligned perfectly, it created something almost magical. Communications that once took weeks to arrive were suddenly delivered within 9 or 10 days. A letter sent from New York could pass through many hands, hundreds of hooves, and cross a vast continent filled with dangers, still reaching its destination ahead of time. The system was daring, delicate, and incredibly effective, yet it came with a hefty price. Now the moment had arrived to face the expenses. The Pony Express was incredibly fast, almost unbelievably fast for its era. But such speed demanded a steep price, not only in danger, sweat, or the occasional horse collapsing during a run, but in very real and significant financial terms. From its inception, the Pony Express was losing money. Covering 1,000 miles of difficult landscape required immense resources. Simply establishing the network with stations, stables, corrals, and supply points cost the founders nearly $200,000, an immense sum in 1860. Then there were the horses, several hundreds, each specially bred for swiftness and stamina rather than longevity. Naturally, the riders and station staff had to receive wages, if modest ones. The cost to send a single letter initially was $5 for half an ounce. When adjusted for inflation, that equals about $170 today for a brief message. Even after the price fell to $1 per letter, it remained unaffordable for most people. The service mainly catered to urgent communications for government or business purposes. Think of financial districts rather than a grandmother's birthday greeting. Despite all the courage and fame, the Pony Express never turned a profit. The founders, Russell, Major, and Weddell, had hoped to secure a valuable government mail contract. However, that contract was never awarded. The United States Post Office was reluctant to fund what many considered a risky and costly operation. The Pony Express was seen as a risky undertaking with political implications, and the unstable political climate before the Civil War only made the situation worse. By the end of 1860, the financial pressure had reached a breaking point. Horses needed constant feeding, stations demanded ongoing maintenance, and riders required frequent replacement. All these expenses were covered personally. Even more challenging was the public's perception that the Express was a thrilling adventure, while in reality it was a logistical disaster, barely managing to survive. Then came the decisive blow. In October 1861, the transcontinental telegraph was completed. Suddenly, messages could be sent from one coast to the other in just seconds. No horses, no riders, no danger, only signals transmitted along wires. This represented the future, cold, efficient, and unstoppable. Just 2 days after the telegraph began operation, the Pony Express ceased functioning. It lasted a mere 18 months but became legendary, not because it earned profits, but because it demonstrated something far braver, that America could overcome its barriers. On October 24, 1861, a quiet but powerful revolution began to unfold across the nation. The last segment of the transcontinental telegraph was finished, connecting the East Coast and the West Coast by wire for the very first time in history. With this achievement, the very problem the Pony Express aimed to solve, fast cross-country communication, became outdated. Messages that once required 10 days on horseback could now be delivered in a matter of minutes. Although it lacked glamour, the telegraph completely transformed communication forever. There were no charging horses or brave riders galloping through fierce snowstorms. Instead, it was skilled telegraph operators tapping Morse code into buzzing machines. Yet it worked, and it worked far better than anyone had anticipated. The Pony Express was like trying to outrun a lightning bolt. You might have been the fastest messenger alive, but you could never match the pure efficiency of electricity traveling along copper wires. Just 2 days after the telegraph line was finished, the Pony Express ended its operation. There was no dramatic conclusion or farewell journey, only quiet. Ironically, this same quietness followed the last Morse signal each night. For Russell, Major, and Waddell, the outcome was financial ruin. They had invested everything into the venture, hoping to gain a valuable government contract. But the government, now enchanted by the telegraph, found little reason to support a horse-driven mail service. The company was dismantled, its possessions auctioned off, and the founders disappeared into bankruptcy and forgetfulness. Despite all its speed and innovation, the telegraph failed to inspire deep emotional connections. It could not be glorified with heroic stories. There were no famous songs about clicking dots and dashes. Meanwhile, the Pony Express, though unsuccessful, told a more captivating tale. Its riders became icons, their adventures chronicled in popular novels, theatrical performances, and eventually, Western movies. Even Buffalo Bill, whose actual role with the Express was probably overstated, became part of its legendary narrative. An entire career was built upon that legend as a symbol of bravery from the Wild West, traveling worldwide. Therefore, although the telegraph finished the race first, the Pony Express claimed victory in the realm of myth. It symbolized the last breath of old-fashioned adventure before America fully transformed into a connected, mechanized, and modern society. Even though the Pony Express only operated for a short period of 18 months, its story endured for well over 100 years. Almost immediately after it ceased operations, authors, journalists, and entertainers began shaping it into a myth, a romantic narrative filled with peril, speed, and the rugged spirit of America. The reality was already remarkable, but mere facts were insufficient. The public yearned for a tale larger than life itself. Consequently, the stories grew more extravagant. Riders were portrayed as outrunning hostile native attacks, making daring leaps over canyons, and surviving for days without any water. Experts in history viewed these claims skeptically. However, readers eagerly consumed dime novels by the wagon load. No one exploited this fascination better than Buffalo Bill Cody. Even though his actual involvement with the Pony Express remains questionable, if it happened at all, Cody recognized the potential. Within his traveling Wild West show, he reenacted exciting Pony Express rides for enthusiastic audiences across Europe and the United States. Children idolized the figure of the lone rider, facing the wilderness with a bag of urgent letters strapped to his back. By the end of the 19th century, the Pony Express had transcended its status as a short-lived postal service. It had become a national symbol, a symbol representing the courage of the frontier, of manifest destiny, and of a period when a lone teenager, riding a Mustang, bore the responsibility of the nation's communication on his shoulders. Communities along the original path began honoring the stations. Monuments were erected. Dedication plaques appeared. In St. Joseph, Missouri, and Sacramento, California, historical signs proudly proclaimed, "Here the Pony Express started." School children learned about the riders as though they were founding fathers on horseback. Naturally, Hollywood soon rode in. Silent movies, television programs, and westerns portrayed romanticized but endearing versions of the Express, often overlooking how harsh, brief, and financially ruinous the actual service had been. Nevertheless, the romantic allure persisted. Perhaps it was because the Pony Express captured something eternal. The belief that unyielding resolve and bravery could triumph over overwhelming challenges. That youthfulness and boldness remained valuable. That even in the presence of advancing technology, there was still room for the human spirit to shine, if only for a moment. Thus, as telegraph wires buzzed overhead and later telephone lines and satellites followed suit, the image of a young rider racing across the plains never disappeared from the American imagination. The Pony Express did more than just carry mail. It carried a legend, a framework, a rugged image of how Americans wished to see themselves. In a nation united by ambition and daring, it became an enduring emblem. The ideal tale is daring, concise, tragic, and full of motion. At its core, the Pony Express embodied a distinct American dream that a single person, armed with enough bravery and resolve, could shoulder the weight of a massive nation alone. A young rider facing storms and arrows represented not only frontier toughness, but also youthful rebellion against the insurmountable. It was never about speed, but rather about spirit. As the new century arrived and America stepped into the industrial era, the determination of that lone rider became a source of nostalgic inspiration. Although railways might have connected the continent and telegraph lines could link cities in moments, those inventions lacked a human touch. The Pony Express was the last instance when communication felt personal, urgent, and heroic. It marked the final romantic moment before machines and cables replaced human strength and effort. From a political perspective, the Pony Express story was also quite convenient. It depicted Western expansion as noble and thrilling instead of chaotic, violent, or exploitative. Educational materials presented it as a victory of bravery rather than a tale about risky financial ventures or conflicts with native peoples. In this way, the legend of the Pony Express helped transform the more uncomfortable aspects of American growth into an uplifting tale. A young rider speeding through the desert is far easier to admire than land disputes or bankrupt businesses. Nevertheless, its significance remains powerful. It demonstrated that the Western territories could indeed be linked together. That distance could indeed be overcome. Although the Express ultimately did not succeed financially, it laid the foundation, both literally and symbolically, for the infrastructure that was to come. The telegraph, the railroad, the cross-country highway all followed in its footsteps. In a sense, the Express represented America's awkward adolescent phase, full of ambitious plans, imperfect execution, noble goals, and some hardships along the path. It was a brief marvel that prepared the ground for something much greater. Even today, while instant communication happens with a simple tap, there remains something captivating about a solitary rider charging into uncertainty. Deep in the dust lies the reminder that progress was once carried on 4 legs and sheer grit. On the 26th of October in 1861, just 2 days after the transcontinental telegraph line became operational, the final Pony Express rider arrived in Sacramento. There were no celebrations or farewell parades, just a quiet conclusion to one of the most daring communication ventures in the history of America. It ended just like that. Yet that last ride was far from a failure. Rather, it was a triumphant final lap. The Express had fulfilled its mission. It demonstrated that a nation as vast and untamed as the United States could be united swiftly, dependably, and through human determination. Even though the telegraph's rapid signals took its place, the Pony Express established a lasting benchmark. Speed, courage, and boldness could still hold significance amid a world dominated by wires and technology. In the years that followed, the Express quickly gained almost legendary status. Statues of riders galloping proudly were erected in town centers. Every July, people gathered to reenact the daring journeys. Postal stamps honored its short, breathtaking existence. Historians, sometimes amused and other times deeply impressed, kept returning to those 18 months that transformed America's self-image. It is easy to overlook how delicate the entire operation truly was. Messages traveled in lightweight pouches that were exchanged between riders in mere seconds. Horses were trained to race at full speed across cliffs, rivers, and steep terrain. The riders were often barely old enough to grow facial hair. They faced ambushes, panics among horses, and brutal snowstorms. Yet against incredible odds, most couriers delivered their messages on time. The Express also left a more nuanced legacy, shaping how Americans perceive the balance between risk and reward. Entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley and speculative traders on Wall Street frequently refer to the Pony Express spirit, making bold, rapid decisions despite the odds being stacked against success. It remains a symbol of attempting the seemingly impossible purely because there is a chance it might work, even if it eventually fails. Nowadays, when we send a message across the world in an instant, it is difficult to comprehend what 10 days journeying on horseback really meant. But that is precisely why the Pony Express endures in memory. It is not celebrated for its duration, but for its daring attempt. For one brief, shining interval, a group of young riders defied the limits of their time. Though eventually overtaken by the telegraph, telephone, and internet, they accomplished something very few have. They achieved what few ventures ever have. They made history and then transformed into legend. Yet it was something beyond mere speed that made the Pony Express truly unforgettable. Long before the violin found its resting place beneath the chins of virtuoso performers and solo artists, before it filled grand opera halls and sonatas with profound emotion, it lived many lives under various names. Its journey did not start in Italy, but much earlier, in the expansive, windy grasslands of Central Asia. Many centuries ago, horsehair was stretched across simple wooden bows to glide over the strings of instruments such as the morineur and the rebob. These early bowed instruments, used by nomadic herders, emitted low nasal tones that resembled the human voice or the sounds of nearby animals. This concept was groundbreaking, employing friction rather than plucking or striking to hold a note. It marked the birth of an expressive method that would resonate throughout many cultures. As trade routes flourished, these instruments traveled westward along the Silk Road, passing through Persia into the Arab world and eventually reaching southern Europe. The rebob, in particular, was introduced to Moorish Spain during the 8th and 9th centuries, where it blended with local musical traditions. At the same time, the Byzantine Empire developed the lyra, another bowed instrument that later influenced the designs found in Eastern Europe. Every culture contributed something unique, a different tuning, a new shape, an extra string. The evolution of these instruments was not linear. Rather, they spread out like branches on a tree, adapting and transforming with each step of their journey. The family lineage of bowed instruments in medieval Europe began with the rebob, which eventually evolved into the vielle and the fiddle. These box-shaped bowed instruments were held against the chest or nestled beneath the chin. They were the companions of traveling minstrels and church musicians who played simple tunes in taverns, streets, and royal halls. Their sound was unpolished yet personal, and their construction straightforward but ingenious. The arrival of the bow introduced a new concept of music. It was no longer seen as a series of short notes, but as a continuous, flowing melody. However, these early fiddles remained primitive compared to later developments. Their shapes varied greatly, and their tuning lacked uniformity. There was no standard design, no perfected soundboard, no fingerboard tailored for nimbleness. Despite this, in their wavering sounds and handmade imperfections, the essence of the violin began to awaken. The idea existed, along with a yearning for an instrument that was more dexterous, expressive, and human. It was merely awaiting skilled hands, the right place, and the perfect moment. As the medieval era transitioned into the Renaissance, Europe was flooded with revolutionary ideas about art, science, and music. Amid cathedrals and noble courts, a subtle change was unfolding. The rough, rudimentary fiddles and vielles of the past were being improved not just in their look, but in their function. Instruments were evolving beyond mere tools for dancing or liturgical drones. They were becoming means of emotional expression. By the 15th century, bowed stringed instruments had become widespread throughout Western society, signaling a significant shift in musical culture and craftsmanship. Europe buzzed with the sound of string instruments found in taverns, wedding celebrations, noble chambers, and theaters, yet no two looked exactly alike. The viol often featured 5 strings, and its form differed greatly depending on the maker. One beloved instrument in Italy, the lira da braccio, possessed a wide body and a flat bridge, making it perfect for playing chords. This was favored by Renaissance poets and humanists who enjoyed having their poetry accompanied by music. Despite their increasing popularity, these instruments faced several drawbacks. Their volume was weak, their tuning systems unreliable, and their overall design too cumbersome for virtuosic performance. Musicians and composers started demanding instruments that offered greater control, wider range, clearer sound, and more responsiveness, something that could express a voice's sweetness yet carry the purity of a flute. Meanwhile, a silent revolution in instrument crafting was underway. Artisans across Italy and Germany explored curved woods, novel varnishes, and more precise carving tools. Their work went far beyond shaping wood. They focused on enhancing resonance. Luthiers discovered that the wood's shape and thickness greatly influenced the sound produced. Thinner tops improved vibration, rounded backs helped project sound farther, and arched bridges enabled the playing of individual strings with clarity. Meanwhile, musical tastes shifted as well. Composers began writing more complex melodies for bowed instruments. The demand no longer centered solely on rhythm or harmony, but on lyrical, soloistic lines that could capture emotions and tell stories through music. A new kind of instrument was about to appear, one that combined compactness, dexterity, and expressiveness. Europe possessed every essential element: a long heritage of bowed instruments, the creative spark of the Renaissance, and a fresh wave of expert craftsmen ready to shape the future. The only piece missing was a fearless individual willing to rethink the instrument completely. In the modest Italian town of Cremona, that individual was on the verge of picking up a chisel. Located in the fertile northern Italian plains along the Po River, Cremona was, in the 16th century, neither a political center nor a military stronghold, but it held something unique: exceptional craftsmanship. This town hosted guilds of makers, artisans, and builders who transformed wood into wonders. It is here that the violin, as we know it today, first truly came into existence. At the heart of this quiet revolution was Andrea Amati, a master luthier whose contributions would shape an entire family of instruments. Drawing inspiration from the lira da braccio and other Renaissance fiddles, Amati perfected the shape of the body, enhanced the curvature of the top and bottom, and established consistent proportions. His work was not mere experimentation; it set the standards. He designed the F-shaped sound holes, which improved sound projection and increased the instrument's stability. His violins were more compact, lighter, and responded better than any previous models. Most importantly, he calibrated them perfectly in intervals of perfect fifths, creating a tuning method that gave the violin its distinctively expressive and nimble sound. By the middle of the 16th century, Amati's violins were sought after by nobility, including King Charles I of France, who requested a collection of 24 instruments for his royal ensemble. These were far more than mere musical devices. They served as symbols of prestige, often adorned with intricate paintings and gilded details, combining technical mastery with artistic beauty. Cremona soon established itself as the heart of superior violin craftsmanship. Following the Amati legacy, other families emerged, especially the Guarneri and Stradivari lineages. They did not simply replicate Amati's work, they expanded, enhanced, and enriched his original concept. Violins produced in Cremona transformed from ordinary workshop creations into recognized masterpieces, each carrying its unique character and essence. Why did this happen in Cremona? Some attribute it to the exceptional quality of the local maple and spruce woods. Others believe the climate was ideal for carefully drying the timber in a gradual and balanced way. Still, others emphasize the close-knit community of guilds, where knowledge was handed down orally through rigorous apprenticeships and secretive practices. Regardless of the cause, Cremona became to violins what Florence was to the world of painting, a center of unparalleled innovation. From those narrow stone-paved streets, an instrument was born that could gently murmur or passionately cry, dance lively, or offer solemn lament. This creation would go on to influence music across Europe and far beyond for centuries. By the early 17th century, the violin had already begun to transcend its origins. No longer limited to the violin workshops of Cremona, the instrument started to journey from palace to palace, chapel to chapel, and beyond the borders of Renaissance Europe. With each voyage, it acquired influence, distinction, and a new function. Italy naturally stayed at the core of violin culture. Composers such as Claudio Monteverdi were among the pioneers to incorporate the violin into formal musical works. In Monteverdi's L'Orfeo, widely regarded as the first great opera, the violins were employed not merely for accompaniment, but also to convey atmosphere, emotion, and sacred grandeur. The violin ceased to be a simple fiddler's device and became a dramatic voice capable of expressing allure, sorrow, and victory. Shortly after, Italian violinists and instrument makers took their craft abroad. They relocated to Germany, Austria, and France, where royal courts eagerly welcomed the newest musical trends. The violin became a staple in chamber music groups, valued for its clarity and brilliance. In Paris, the court of Louis XIV embraced it with enthusiasm. The Sun King even maintained a special 24-member violin ensemble called Les 24 Violons du Roi, a strong symbol of the instrument's growing importance. Meanwhile, in Germany and Austria, new traditions of violin playing and making began to flourish. Craftsmen such as Jakob Steiner developed instruments with wider and more resonant bodies, favoring a warmer sound rather than the sharp brightness typical of Italian models. Virtuosos like Heinrich Bieber further advanced the art of violin performance. The technical limitations of the instrument inspired composers to create challenging solo pieces rich in decorative elements and emotional depth. Even churches welcomed the violin, where it supported choirs, filling spacious cathedrals with soaring melodies, and played a vital role in sacred oratorios. No longer viewed as overly sensual or worldly, it gained acceptance within the most revered spheres of spiritual music. By the close of the 17th century, the violin had evolved beyond being a mere curiosity. It became indispensable to composers, performers, and listeners alike. The instrument felt equally at ease in a dimly lit tavern, an opulent royal dance, or a cathedral illuminated by flickering candles. Yet its journey was far from complete. Soon followed the golden era of violin craftsmanship, marked by the emergence of a name that would become nearly synonymous with excellence, Antonio Stradivari. If Andrea Amati was the originator of the violin, Antonio Stradivari perfected its form. Born in Cremona in 1644, Stradivari apprenticed in the Amati workshop, but swiftly surpassed simple replication. What he crafted during the late 17th and early 18th centuries set the highest benchmark not only for violins, but for the art of musical instrument making as a whole. Stradivari's creations were not just visually stunning, they were sublime. His attentive selection of tone woods, subtle asymmetrical designs, meticulous shaping, and a still enigmatic varnish contributed to both the visual allure and acoustic richness. Stradivari violins produced a voice that was brilliant, commanding, and hauntingly warm, capable of carrying to the furthest corners of any performance space. A concert venue, yet it can whisper intimately to a single listener. Stradivari crafted over 1,000 instruments throughout his life: violins, violas, cellos, and even guitars. Approximately 650 of these instruments still exist today, each one bearing a name worthy of nobility: the Messiah, the Soil, the Lady Blunt. Many are still performed on by the world's most renowned soloists. Even after centuries, their tone remains unmatched. Some researchers have attempted to uncover Stradivari's secret by examining the wood, studying the varnish, or simulating the acoustics. However, the truth is no one has been able to truly duplicate his work. What made his creations so extraordinary? Part of the answer lies in the materials used: slow-grown alpine spruce for the top plate and flamed maple for the back, aged to near perfection. Still, the most significant factor was Stradivari's careful fine-tuning, subtle adjustments to thickness, curvature, and form, which gave each instrument its distinct personality. During his lifetime, Stradivari's reputation extended far beyond Cremona. Monarchs, nobles, and virtuosos eagerly sought after his instruments. His workshop gained legendary status even after his passing in 1737. Musicians considered a Stradivarius the ultimate treasure, an instrument so sensitive it seemed alive. Stradivari was not the only master craftsman of his era. The Guarneri family, especially Giuseppe Guarneri del Gesù, created violins with darker and more forceful tones preferred by soloists such as Paganini. Nevertheless, Stradivari's name has survived as a legend, his instruments regarded as relics from a divine age of sound creation, a golden era. The period of violin craftsmanship had reached its highest point. From then on, the violin would transition from the workshop to the stage, entering the era of virtuosos who would push both the instrument and the human soul beyond imaginable boundaries. By the 18th century, the violin had completely transformed from a background voice into a leading presence. It no longer simply supported harmonies or drove dance rhythms. It began to express itself as if it had its own distinct character. In the hands of a new generation of performers, the virtuosos, the violin became a source of wonder and admiration. Among the earliest prominent figures was Arcangelo Corelli, whose refined and emotive sonatas helped shape the violin's significance in Baroque music. He avoided ostentation, but his performance was celebrated for elegance and mastery. His works laid the foundation for countless violinists, focusing on phrasing, sound quality, and composition. Following him was Antonio Vivaldi, the fiery Venetian priest. An impassioned composer and virtuoso, Vivaldi created more than 230 violin concertos, with the Four Seasons being the most renowned. These compositions were more than melodies. They provided dramatic experiences filled with mimics of birdsong, storms, and rustic dances. Vivaldi proved that the violin was capable not just of singing, but of storytelling. As musical preferences gradually moved toward the classical period, the violin stayed in the spotlight. Composers such as Mozart and Beethoven crafted violin sonatas and concertos that required subtlety, agility, and profound emotional insight. The violinist was no longer merely a skilled player. They needed to become a narrator and a performer, moving in harmony with the orchestra and infusing each passage with emotion. However, it was during the early 19th century that the concept of the violinist as a legendary figure reached its height due to Niccolò Paganini. With his slender frame, otherworldly presence on stage, and seemingly unparalleled technique, Paganini transcended the role of a mere musician. He became a sensation. Spectators murmured that he had forged a pact with the devil. His fingers danced over the strings in breathtaking displays of double stops, harmonics, and left-hand pizzicato. His 24 caprices for solo violin remain an immense challenge for today's performers. Paganini revolutionized the art of violin playing. Following his impact, the craft was transformed forever. He raised the violin's status to that of a celebrity, ushering in an era when solo virtuosos earned admiration comparable to royalty. With every stroke of the bow, the violin ceased to be just an instrument. It became a voice that could sound divine, menacing, or unforgettable. As the violin's influence and esteem grew throughout the 18th and 19th centuries, it secured its position as the primary pillar of the orchestra. Previously a support to singers and other instruments, the violin took the lead. Melodious, expressive, and highly adaptable, it became the trusted tool for composers to realize their most ambitious creations. This evolution started with the Baroque orchestra, where string instruments already formed the core of the ensemble. The violin sections were among the first. A second violin emerged to bring harmony and melody. Composers like Bach and Handel gave the violin important roles in their concertos and orchestral suites. However, it remained part of the ensemble's identity. There were no large string sections yet, only tight and intimate groups. Then the classical period arrived and everything expanded. Composers such as Haydn and Mozart developed the modern symphony, placing the violin in a central position. Haydn, often regarded as the father of the symphony, created rich and balanced orchestral textures, with violins serving as the main melodic force. Mozart took this further by assigning violins delicate and soaring lines, treating them with both tenderness and agility. In his symphonies, the violin could sound playful, sorrowful, or divine within just a few measures. Yet it was Beethoven who genuinely revolutionized the orchestra. He increased its size, broadened its emotional scope, and set new challenges for every section, especially the strings. The first violins frequently carried the main themes, while the second violins provided essential harmonic and rhythmic support. No longer mere background players, they became the storytellers of symphonic drama. By the Romantic era, orchestras had grown tremendously, and the violin reigned supreme. Brahms, Tchaikovsky, Dvorak, among others, gifted the violin lush melodies and heroic passages in symphonies and concertos alike. Orchestral violinists had to master subtlety, stamina, and teamwork while keeping pace with the orchestra's expanding demands. Music was advancing swiftly into greater intricacy. Conductors began to depend upon the concertmaster, the principal violinist, not simply to guide the section, but to serve as the link between the conductor and the musicians. In numerous respects, the concertmaster assumed the role of second leader, overseeing tuning, bowing techniques, and establishing the overall atmosphere for the entire group. Whether in small chamber ensembles or orchestras of 100 players, the violin ingrained itself deeply into the essence of Western classical music. It evolved beyond being merely a musical instrument. It became the very voice representing the symphony. By the 20th century, the violin had fully dominated the concert venues of Europe, yet its story continued to unfold. Freed from the confines of symphony halls and opera pits, the violin crossed boundaries and genres, merging its sound with cultures far removed from its original Italian heritage. In Eastern Europe, long before composers like Tchaikovsky or Brahms popularized it, the violin was a vibrant, emotional cornerstone of Romani music. In the hands of Romani players, the instrument soared with both dazzling skill and heart-wrenching tunes. It served as an emblem of both resistance and joyous celebration, passed down through generations by oral tradition instead of formal schooling. Across the ocean, the violin underwent another transformation into the fiddle. Within American folk traditions, Appalachian ballads, and bluegrass tunes, the violin discarded its noble elegance and donned the attire of hard-working people. It became a shared instrument among communities, guiding lively barn dances and narrating stories through energetic reels and jigs. The style transformed as well. Rapid and rhythmic bowing, open tunings, and spontaneous improvisation took the spotlight. In India, the violin discovered a completely new character. It was incorporated into Carnatic and Hindustani classical music. Played while seated on the floor, the scroll positioned near the ankle of the player, Indian violinists mastered microtonal variations, slides, and intricate ornamentations unfamiliar to Western listeners, but perfectly matched to Ra and Tala. The instrument bridged cultures and acquired a distinctly Indian identity. At the same time, the violin thrived in Latin America within mariachi bands and folk groups. In Argentina, it pirouetted alongside the bandoneon in the dimly lit world of tango. In Mexico, it sang soaring melodies over trumpets and guitars. Wherever it traveled, the violin adapted not by overpowering, but by harmonizing and merging with local sounds. Jazz propelled the violin to new heights. During the 1930s and 40s, artists like Stéphane Grappelli transformed it into a lively, swinging lead voice in France's vibrant hot clubs. Later, Jean-Luc Ponty and Regina Carter reinvented the violin for fusion and contemporary jazz, proving its ability to groove, bend notes, and improvise alongside the finest musicians. By the 21st century, the violin had become a universal communicator. It fluently expressed every musical dialect: classical, jazz, folk, experimental. Its tone could be rich or raw, precise or unrestrained, and through all its evolutions, it retained an unmistakable essence, always remaining true to itself. In the modern era, the violin occupies a remarkable position, an enduring instrument amid swift transformations. It continues to command respect in orchestras, recital venues, and music schools. Nevertheless, it also flourishes in musical styles and environments that the great masters of the past could never have envisioned. Its sound, haunting and deeply expressive, remains endlessly versatile, resonating across nations and traditions. Within the realm of classical music, the violin holds a vital role. Young virtuosos captivate audiences worldwide with concertos composed hundreds of years ago, infusing them with renewed passion and extraordinary skill. Prestigious contests such as the Queen Elizabeth or the Menuhin serve as launching pads for emerging artists, ensuring the classical heritage remains dynamic and intensely competitive. However, a transformation is underway. Numerous musicians are challenging conventions by exploring new possibilities for the violin's voice. Modern composers are crafting pieces that incorporate unconventional techniques, electronic effects, loops, and tuning systems from diverse cultures. The violin does not only sing now, it scratches, murmurs, screams, and taps. It can imitate the sounds of machines, birds, or pure disorder. In the hands of innovators like Hilary Hahn, Patricia Kopachinskaya, and Curtis Stewart, the violin becomes a sonic experimental space. At the same time, technology is changing how we experience this instrument. Electric violins, once rare curiosities, are increasingly found in pop, rock, and avant-garde music scenes. Performers such as Lindsey Stirling combine dance, electronic dance music, and cinematic storytelling, creating a unique blend that pushes the violin beyond traditional boundaries. Viral violin performances captivate millions across the internet. They show that the instrument's charm goes beyond sound alone. It appeals visually and stirs emotions deeply and personally. Education is also transforming with resources like YouTube lessons, online masterclasses, and digital sheet music, making the violin easier to access for everyone. A learner in Nairobi or Limmer can study under a professor from Juilliard just by tapping a screen. However, this widespread availability brings a dilemma. How can one maintain true depth and discipline when the world values speed above all else? Yet through this chaos, the violin continues to thrive. Why does it persist? Because it has always been a true extension of the human voice. It weeps exactly as we do. It sings the songs we long to express. Whether performed on a worn stage, a busy subway platform, or for an audience of 10 million subscribers, the violin possesses the unique ability to pause time, if only briefly. Fragile but strong, timeless yet constantly changing, the violin is far more than a musical tool. It tells stories, and its narrative is far from finished.